So we're just going to start at the top of the page. We're going to work our way through the entire application. I will try to clarify some of the standards as well as identify some of the areas that have been a little problematic for nurse planners over the past few years. So starting here at the top with your demographic information, this is all about your organization as well as the nurse planner and a secondary contact person. So your application and organization name, that would be the name of the organization that is applying for approval of the CNE credit. Your address, the name and credentials of the nurse planner. So this would be important, and it's important because you have to meet this minimum qualification that's in the note right here. And so as nurses, we tend to want to always put like our PhD, RN, but that doesn't identify to us as the reviewer if it has met the minimum criteria. So be sure that if you are a PhD, that you indicate either MSN or BSN or something to let us know that you at least have a minimum education at a baccalaureate level in nursing. PhD only tells us you have a PhD, but it doesn't tell us if it's in nursing. And that's why I like to put that clarification. So we've given you some examples here that are acceptable and the same explanation that I just gave you. We need the nurse planner's email address, contact phone number, a secondary person who may be assisting in the completion of the document, the title, address, phone number.
Does the secondary contact need to be a nurse as well?
No. A lot of times there is administrative assistants and office staff that is helping to complete the application, you know, the minutia details, but the content of it really needs to be assessed and determined by the nurse planner. And as we review the application, we will only communicate with the nurse planner because we need to make sure that the nurse planner has understood the standards as they are written. So I know that's a long-winded answer, but the answer is no. Okay, going on to your activity information. So as you're planning your activity, be sure to complete and fill in the title of your activity. And then you will be filling in the number of contact hours that you're offering to the participant, as well as the number of contact hours to be reviewed. Now, in most cases, both of those numbers will be the same because you're offering maybe a 1 hour presentation, or perhaps you're offering a 1-day presentation where everybody goes to all the same sessions throughout the day. They would be identical. But if you're offering a larger session where maybe it's a 3-day conference and you have breakout sessions and people can come to 1 day or 2 days or the 3rd day, or they can't go to all the breakout sessions, this is where it's important. We need the maximum number of hours that you are submitting to the WMSB for approval. So add all the hours up from all 3 days, all breakout sessions, and put that number here. Then you need to go back and calculate, if I was one single participant and I was going to attend every single day and the maximum number of breakout sessions for me as one person, you're going to put that number that the individual person would be able to attend. So I want to just make sure that that is clear, that they could be different, but they also could be the same.
Okay. Understood.
Good. Awesome. So activity type, this is, there's different activity types that can be offered. The first one is a provider-directed, provider-paced. This is either a live session or a webinar session that is offered on a particular day at a particular location. So fill in the blanks here. They're clickable, and you can add whatever you need to from that and just fill in the blanks. A provider-directed, learner-paced enduring material. Oh, well, let me go back. If you're doing a webinar session or a live session that you've recorded here, and you want to make it available to people that they can click on, then you are at a provider-directed, learner-paced enduring material. So you put the date of the start and the expiration date. We will approve your application once it meets all the standards for up to a 2-year period. So your enduring material will be good for a 2-year period. Your live activity will also be good for a 2-year period. So if you were to present that exact same event another day in the year or within 2 years, exactly the same without any or only minor modifications, it'll still qualify under here. Learner-directed, learner-paced enduring. I'm going to tell you these are few and far between with individual activities because it takes a lot more planning on the nurse planner's part with that learner-directed learning activity that they want to do. And with blended activities, the blended activities is when you're doing, let's say, doing a live session, but maybe there's some online pre-work that they have to do before showing up, or maybe there's some homework in the middle of an activity, or maybe there's a post-activity, post-live event activity that they need to complete online. That would be considered a blended activity. So let me stop and ask if there's any questions on activity type.
So for like a one-day conference, it would be your provider-directed live, right?
Correct. It would be the first box.
And then if you wanted to do like a lecture that you wanted people to be able to access for a certain period of time, that would be the enduring material?
That's correct. Okay, we'll move on. Commercial support. This is any monetary amount that you receive from a commercial entity as defined by the ANCC that is helping to finance your event. So you would need to fill that in if you are getting any commercial support from an entity. And potentially, if you are jointly providing this activity between 2 entities, so let's say, so I'm in Arizona, and I have a great example here in Arizona. There we have the Arizona chapter for the NLN, and we have an Arizona Nurses Association chapter, ANA, and they jointly plan conferences pretty much every year. And so they would set up a joint provider agreement saying how all the funds would come in, how the funds would be distributed, who's responsible for what, and they would have an agreement and they would mark that as a joint provider. Both of these areas, the commercial support and the jointly provided, if there's none, don't worry about it, move on to the next section.
So on the commercial support, do you want to put no in there or just leave it blank?
Just leave it blank if there's nothing. And if you want to put a 0, you can put a 0 for no money, whatever you'd like. This next section on the NARS reporting, so the WMSD has to report to the ANCC all activities that are approved. And so although you may not have to fill the NARS reporting system out for the ANCC, we do, and we have to kind of know what your activity is about, which we can surmise based on this information up here under activity type. But it would be helpful if you could mark it either as a course or a live internet course or a regularly scheduled series or a journal-based activity. That would be very helpful for us when we're reporting. Now, a regularly scheduled series, because we haven't really discussed that, would still be considered a live event. However, it is something that you may have a global topic that you want to introduce one component on one day, and maybe 2 months later you want to introduce another component, and 3 months later you want to introduce a third component. That would be considered a regular scheduled series. It's the same overall content, but there's components of it that are offered at different times and intervals throughout the week, the month, the year. So that would be what that is about. A journal-based CNE would be more that you are on a unit and you want to have all the staff read a particular journal, answer some questions about it, have a discussion, and that would be telling us it's a journal-based CNE activity, which would ultimately fall under a learner-directed, learner-paced enduring material type thing, because you can let that go on for a few months, and anybody who has the time while they're on the unit to read that journal article can come in and do it in their free time. Eligibility requirements, there's 5 things that you need to be aware of for eligibility. We've spelled out every single question. If the answer ends up being no and it says stop, then you can't proceed to the rest of the application. So as long as it's meeting eligibility criteria by answering those 5 questions, you can move on to signing that you understand, the nurse planner understands what is involved in the application process. So here, be sure to fill in, again, the name of your organization, put the electronic signature, fill in the date, and then sign, electronically sign, and then move on to the application. So a lot of that stuff can be completed, obviously, by the administrative staff. The next section area is really focused on the nurse planner's components. So topic A, description of the professional practice gap. I'm going to tell you this sometimes is problematic for the nurse planners. I say keep it simple and not too flowery and not too much detail. So your current state, to me, is basically what is the problem that you want to fix through this educational endeavor that you are planning. The desired state is what would you like to see as a result of you doing this educational endeavor that will, in total or in part, fix the current state. The gap is that difference. Is it a knowledge? Is it a skill? Is it a practice? So be sure to identify in detail. And I like to give an example of keeping it real simple. Hey, we have a problem that the nurses are not doing XYZ procedure in the hospital. I'm going to do an educational endeavor on procedure XYZ. The desired state is I want the nursing staff to competently perform or know the details of that particular procedure XYZ at the completion of this event. The gap is there's a gap in the knowledge of the nursing staff related to XYZ procedure, or there's a gap in the skill level or competency level of the nurses related to XYZ procedure, demonstrated by some performance issues that have occurred. So I'm going to stop there, ask you if that is clear, and maybe help guide you into what your situation might be that you're looking at.
So for our event, we have presentations on a bunch of different topics. So for these practice gap boxes, should our nurse planner go through every single session and say the current state, the desired state, and the identified gap? Should she do that for each different session, or can it just be more general?
It can be very global. This is why we're planning this event, because there's a general problem with a global situation. Now, each of the topics below that, as you start to plan it, should all relate back into that general overview. So you don't want to have a conference that does some things on technology, and then here's a little bit on leadership, and here's a little bit on something else. That kind of has to relate to your overarching topic. So make that overarching theme, so to speak, as general as possible to encompass all the components that you're going to add from there. So when we get to section B, evidence to validate the professional practice gap. So you have a lot of options here that we have included, plus a box for you to fill in a brief description or summary of the information that you have that validates the need for this activity. So perhaps you got a lot of feedback from nurses on the unit, perhaps you got feedback from the physician group that there's a problem, maybe there's something at the hospital level organizationally wise that is a problem or a new initiative for the hospital. So explain your data right here and just check the box of how you got that data. Then here for C, it is a simplified gap, which says select the educational need that underlies the professional practice gap. It is a click box, and you have a gap in knowledge, a gap in skill, and a gap in practice, or perhaps there's something else. But one of those three is usually what we see on an activity planning. And so although you click it here, practice gap in knowledge, when you're up here, you should elaborate on that just a little bit further so it ties in the current state with the desired state and give us a little more information other than just saying gap in knowledge. For the educational design process, you want to describe your target audience. We've given you a number of drop-down boxes and a bunch of people that you can select that you are targeting. So it's always kind of for nurses because otherwise you wouldn't be completing this application. So general RNs, advanced practice RNs, specialty such as maybe maternal child, or maybe it's the NICU, ICU nurses. And of course, you can always have other professionals that may be joining you. So, but your key ones are your RNs and your LPNs, and then anybody else you choose to add. And we've given you a number of boxes, so you can check many boxes. You can even copy and paste and add a fifth or a sixth box if you'd like to. So with that, thinking about your practice gap and what you'd like to change in the environment, what is your desired learning outcome? What is the goal of putting this event together? What do you want to see? It's just a one-sentence statement, maybe two, to tell us about the learning outcome that you want your attendees to be able to achieve at the end of this educational endeavor. A lot of people will write in up here under E, they'll write in objectives. At the end of the event, the learner will blah, 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 blah. ANCC looks as objectives more as what you as a nurse planner are going to impart upon your presenters that you would like them to be able to impart to the attendees, which those objectives can fall in another area of the application. But the outcome, the learning outcome, is not a whole bunch of objectives. It's just one major outcome: to improve the knowledge of the nursing staff related to XYZ procedure. At the end of this educational endeavor, how are you going to measure that you were successful? Now with that, there can be short-term and there can be longer-term outcome measures. For a short-term, it could be as simple as identify one change in practice that you will initiate or apply to your practice as a result of this educational event. And you want 100% of your audience to complete that on the post-event survey. It's measurable. You know how many people attended, you know how many completed the certificate, and they all probably identified at least one thing that you wanted to, one thing they wanted to apply to their practice. A longer-term outcome measure may be that you want to resurvey your attendees in 6 months to see if they actually did apply their one change in practice to their practice activities. Or maybe in working in a hospital, you can actually observe the nurses looking at watching them do this in their practice. Or perhaps you have quality data that you've gotten from the nurse manager and other departments about the success after the event and how it has changed the outcome for the patient. So these two, E and F, go together. A general statement about what you would like the outcome to be and how you're going to measure that you achieve that outcome. This section here on the area of impact, it will either be a professional development, which means the nurses are going to learn something from this and it's going to enhance their professional development. It could also be that you want to measure patient outcomes. So if you have the benefit of being able to get data about a patient population and show that it went from 50% compliant to 75% compliant, click the patient outcome. If there's some other way you are going to impact, check the box and describe it.
On the outcome measure, you just need, like that one question would be sufficient? Like how are you going to change your practice?
That's correct. How am I going to measure that XYZ procedure knowledge has been improved? I'm going to have the nursing or the attendees identify at least one key component of the procedure that they will now implement into their daily practice. Content of activity. Now it says here that if your activity is over 3 hours, you have to complete the educational planning table. So check the box. If it's under, you can check the bottom box. I strongly encourage all activities to be completed on the educational planning table because it eases your need to elaborate in narrative format on the application over and over and over again. So that's why I really encourage you, just fill out the table. It's going to be much easier for you in the long run. So once you complete that, then you're going to fill in the content. You've got a number of options for your content, references, so be sure to check a box and fill in. You have documentable little grayed out areas here where you can fill in all your APA references that you're going to utilize. We don't need every single reference, but key references that are supporting the content that you are going to be implementing or standards that you want to impart the knowledge to your staff, just list them here. It supports your content. H, assessment of commercial interest and conflict of interest. So first you need to know what is a commercial interest entity. And so we have put the definition right here on the application, as well as what a conflict of interest is based on the commercial interest entity. We've gone in and tried to help you as well analyze conflict of interest. So nurse planners have the responsibility of assessing the commercial interest and the conflict of interest for everybody on their committee, as well as all speakers and presenters that are at their conference. So part of the process might be that you distribute our conflict of interest form that is attached to this application to everybody on the team, and have them self-disclose based on the information on that conflict of interest form. Then the nurse planner needs to come in and analyze every person and what they've written and determine if there is a conflict of interest or there isn't a conflict of interest. Now that I've said the long details of it, I'm going to give you the shortcut. The shortcut is these 3 questions. Question number 1, does the activity include content related to a commercial entity's products or services? And the rest of it is that will be used on patients. If the answer is no, stop, check the no box, right here, no conflict of interest, so the forms are not required. Explain briefly how you determined there was no conflict of interest. I just repeat this. The activity does not include content related to a commercial entity's products or services that will be used on patients. Sign your name, attest to it, date it, you are done. We don't need your conflict of interest forms. You don't need to really assess any of the forms. You probably don't even need to distribute any of those forms because the content is not related. But now let's go back. If it turns out that the content might relate to a product or service of a commercial entity that could be used on patients, does that individual or the significant other have they had any financial relationship with the commercial entity in the past 12 months? If the answer to that is yes, then you must go on to question number 3. Is the individual on the planning committee in a position to control content? And if the answer is yes, then obviously you need to go through on the conflict of interest form and you need to resolve the conflict. And there's a number of ways you can resolve the conflict. You can take that person off of the planning committee, off of the speaking engagement. You can modify their presentation in some way so that they are not presenting the information about those services. They are spelled out on the conflict of interest forms. And so if you have a conflict of interest, you need to go to that form, resolve the conflict, because you cannot offer CNE credit for any activity that has a conflict of interest or any presentation of that activity that has a conflict of interest.
If we were to have presenters, doctors or nurses, that are presenting mainly educational content, updates and practices, that don't have any relation to any kind of commercial equipment or entity. So what you were saying before is that's when the COI are not needed at all?
As long as the topic does not relate to any products or services of a commercial entity, you do not need to you do not need to submit to us any COI forms. But it's up to the nurse planner to analyze if there's any products or services or commercial interest entities participating in the planning or presentation of the topic.
Is that something that we should be asking our presenters when they've agreed to speak? We have a planned topic for them, but should we be asking when we're getting their, final presentation title and knowing exactly what they're going to speak on? Should we be asking them if they have, are going to reference any kind of commercial entity, and then that's how we decide if we need the forms or not?
Well, here's my recommend is when you're in the planning process and you've identified your topic and you've identified obviously your learning outcome and your objectives that you'd like to have the presenters present, and then you've made a decision that, oh, these people would be great as presenters. Here's what I would do is I would have them fill out the conflict of interest form, the top half, and self-report for the last 12 months, have they had any involvement in. The nurse planner then needs to make the determination, is this going to be a conflict related to our topic? Now, like I said, if your topic is all on leadership and you have people that work for, I don't know, Baxter Pharmaceutical, are they still around? But she's going to be talking on leadership. Baxter Pharmaceuticals is a pharmaceutical company. They're not a company about leadership. So although she may disclose that she works for Baxter Pharmaceutical, it's really not a conflict because the topic of leadership is not a product or service that Baxter Pharmaceutical would be distributing for patient use. Section I, these are people who are in a position to control content, and it gives that you must have at least 2 people on your planning committee, and this is the table here as to who's on your planning committee. Your planning committee minimally must include a nurse planner and a content expert. I also add, you probably want to have all of your presenters listed because they obviously have some degree of controlling the content. Answer the questions, they're right here. Are they a planning committee member? Is the content related to a commercial interest entity? If your answer is no, all of these should actually be no as well. But if it does relate, then you need to go through and answer these sections E, F, and G of the planning table. And if you get to G and you have yeses, then you need to complete the, you need to attach the conflict of interest form to your application. So these are all examples across here. So delete that box and complete it for your organization. You can add rows, simply cut and paste and add some additional rows. A brief description of the expertise of the nurse planner. She's been a nurse for 20 years, she's been in education for the last year. Hey, she knows stuff. The expertise of your content expert. Again, 1 or 2 sentences about the content expert and why you deem that they're the content expert that can review the content of all the presenters and know whether it's good, bad, and should be removed, or it can stay in the application, in the presentation. Your learner engagement strategies, again, here's where it says, fill it in on the educational planning table, or figure it out what you're going to do here. And I just suggest filling out the planning table. Calculation of hours is here, and we have a lot of things in here for live or enduring material. So if you're doing a live session, enter the hours, the maximum number of contact hours a participant can earn for this activity. So back at the beginning where we differentiated between the full contact hours and the participant contact hours, this is where that maximum number is going to go. How did you determine the hours to be awarded is question number 3. If it's all a live performance, total of minutes divided by 60 tells you how many credit hours that they can get moving forward. If you're doing something on the web, you may have to do a pilot study to see how long it takes some sample learners to get through it. You may have some historical data about, and this is mostly enduring type materials, about how long it takes people to complete a session. Maybe there was a professional opinion that was based on the complexity, or using the formula, and there's a whole calculation for determining on web-based sessions how long it will take the people to be able to complete that event. So here's a live activity. Be sure you complete number 2 and check the first box. Criteria for awarding contact hours, that's another checkbox. Do you want them to attend for a specific period of time? 100% of the time, can miss no more than 10 minutes of any session or the entire event. Describe. If you have a number of breakout sessions, or let's say you have a 3-day conference and the attendee can go to all of it, or 1 day of it, or 2/3 of it, then you probably want to say that the contact hours will be awarded based on their actual hours of attending. You may want to have them submit their evaluation before they get their CE certificate. Check the box. If there's a post-test, check the box. If they have to do a return demonstration, check the box. If they have to do an analysis of the case presentation, whatever it is that you're going to have them do to get their CE credit, then you need to mark this box, mark the appropriate boxes.
And you can check more than one box, or you should only pick one?
No, you can check more than one box. So, example, I do a number of live web presentations. So I check the box. I always want them to attend the entire thing. And what I mark, though, is other, is that they must sign in to the web-based session throughout the entire web presentation. So I can see if someone clicks in and clicks out. Whether they're sitting there is another question, but I can see whether they're there or not. I then also click, they must complete a evaluation form. So because we're web-based, we send out a post-event survey, and they must complete the survey before their certificate will be issued to them. And so I'll click both of those boxes. Description of the evaluation method. This ties back into those measurable outcomes that you did. Again, I mentioned short-term and long-term evaluation options. Short-term, participant evaluation will self-report intent to change practice, or again, maybe there's a post-test. Whatever it is, how are you going to evaluate that that gap was closed and that they learned something from your educational endeavor? People tend to get confused and they click something in the short term and something in the long term. You only have to click short term. You don't have to click both. But if you have the luxury of going back and doing a follow-up survey, maybe 3 months, 6 months down the line, or finding out some return on investment or a change in patient outcomes, and you're going to go back and look for that information and analyze it to see if it was effective, then click something in the long-term option and describe what you're going to do for the long-term evaluation process. Such as, I did a long-term evaluation on one of our events, and I went in 90 days after the event. It was on the Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation initiative from the ANA, and we did one in Arizona. And so 3 months after the event, I sent a follow-up survey to all of the attendees and said, hey, it's been 90 days. These are the top 5 items that you all presented that you were going to implement as a result of this activity. Please identify which ones that you have engaged in and tell us what the outcome has been. I will tell you, a lot of people forgot about the educational endeavor, but they appreciated the fact that I tickled them with another survey to jog their memory and get off the stick and start to implement something. So that's kind of how I did a long-term assessment of whether there was an impact on the healthy nurse and the health of the nation. The last 2 items here are record keeping for you. So when you do your event, you need to obviously evaluate your event through these surveys and analyze the outcome. But the responsibility of the WMSD ends at the point where we issue your approval statement. But your responsibility as a nurse planner does not end. You do have to evaluate the outcome of your event and analyze it on a summative evaluation form, which I will show you in a minute. And you must keep all your documents on hand for a minimum of 6 years following the completion of the event. So this just explains what you should be doing in Section N and acknowledging the record-keeping requirement of 6 years. The reason that you need to keep these items for 6 years are twofold. One is attendees may write to you for a period of time to get a copy of their certificate. They need it for their license renewal. They need it for their advanced practice certificate renewal. And, oh, they've misplaced it. So you need to be able to have that information at hand. And the other thing is, because you're part of the WMSD, and the WMSD is a part of the ANCC, sometimes there are audits that trickle down, and ANCC might ask the WMSD for XYZ information about a particular activity, and I may ring your phone or email you and say, hey, your activity's been tagged for an audit. Can you please submit your activity summary and your records from the actual event so we can close the file and give it to the ANCC for an audit review. This is the educational planning table. Fill in your organization's name, the title of that activity as cut and pasted from the earlier section of the application, as well as that learning outcome that we identified up in Section E. Cut and paste, put it in. Now here's how you determine your credits that you're going to be offering. Put the start time, put the stop time of every single activity, put the total minutes. So these are examples here. I've marked in red anything that does not count toward continuing education, such as an introduction, a break, a lunch. Anything in black is what is included in CE credit. So once you know how long your events are and how you're going to break them out, tabulate the minutes, and in this example, it gives you 375 minutes total from beginning to end of the event. List the session and title and presenter, just like here, introduction. Welcome and introduction, housekeeping items. Susan Gonda, I really don't have any other content, and I really am just going to lecture to them and tell them what they need to do. But your next presenter, you're going to want to put the title of their presentation, their name, perhaps their credentials if you like, their content topic, or perhaps the objectives that you've directed them to achieve during this session, and their engagement strategies, i.e. PowerPoint lecture, opportunity for discussion, questions and answers, case scenario that will be analyzed by table groups. Whatever that engagement strategy is for that particular presentation, just type them in. So then when we get to calculating the hours, it tells you what to do. Total minutes, 375, 375. And now I put in red, minus the total non-CE minutes, which I put 90, 60, 75, 90. So subtract that, gives you 285 minutes. Divide 285 by 60. It tells you how many contact hours that you can award.
If you have a lunch where there's a speaker, do you just list that as a separate presentation?
I would put it, what I would do, like, so a lot of people will offer a lunch, but you've got to give them some time to actually get their lunch and sit down. So I'd be clear that 15 minutes or 20 minutes for lunch.
Okay.
And during the lunch break, the remainder of 40 minutes, there'll be a speaker. And yes, you can then include that speaker's topic and what they're going to do for that remaining time. So attachment number 2 is your COI form, which if you need to duplicate it, just go ahead and duplicate it as many times as you need to. It's got, again, the same fill in the blanks that you've had all along, where you fill in, just type and fill in what you need. The role of the person that is self-reporting here, any information about them, their conflict of interest statement, it's pretty clear, and if there's an actual potential or perceived conflict by that person or their significant other, self-report yes or no, and then if it's a yes, they need to explain, and then sign their name and date it. So all of your people on your committee, if you determine there is a potential for a conflict of interest, should complete this form, including the nurse planner, but the nurse planner can't analyze their own form. They have to have somebody else analyze from here out. So if you've determined that there's a potential for conflict of interest, then you proceed, and here are all your options of what you can do to resolve the conflict. It's not applicable. There's no conflict of interest, because we used to require these forms of everybody on every application, and that's why this is still here. So if you've done that, you've determined for this particular event there's no conflict, just mark the box, sign your name, file it away in your records, but I don't need it. You can remove the individual from participating in all parts of the educational activity. You can revise their role so it's no longer relevant to the educational activity. Do not award credit for that component of the educational activity. You can review their educational material for bias and make sure that there's nothing, their slides can't show that I work for Baxter Pharmaceutical, but I'm not talking about Baxter Pharmaceutical. You want to just make sure any bias is eliminated. So although your topic may not have a conflict of interest, if you've determined that there could be bias, then you, the nurse planner, should review their slides, inform them that they can't talk about Baxter Pharmaceutical, even though the topic is on leadership, so that none of that will creep in to the event. If it's very dicey, you may want to assign somebody to sit in the educational event and listen for bias, just to make sure it doesn't take place. So there's 2 components: conflict of interest for topic and commercial interest, but also bias in their presentation. And then the nurse planner signs and dates, or if this is being done for the nurse, on behalf of the nurse planner's conflict of interest, then somebody else would sign and date that they have reviewed this information that the nurse planner has submitted.
Would you suggest that the content expert be the person who reviews the nurse planner COI form?
That would be perfectly great, because if there's only 2 people, that would be an excellent option. Sample certificate of completion. Now, I did pull this up because it's not in the packet. So let me open it and move it over so that you can see it. So it's just a sample, but there's certain things that you have to have within the certificate. You have to have the activity, the name, the provider's name, the address, the participant's name. You don't have to have the credentials. Insert the hours that are being awarded for the activity. Oh, here's the title of the activity. The date, the location of where you are holding the event, and the WMSD provider approval number, which we will send to you once we approve your application. And the last important sentence is right here. And the continuing education activity was approved by the Western MultiState Division as an accredited approver of American Nurses Credentialing Centers Commission on Accreditation. So that all of this information needs to be on your certificate of completion. If you do have a commercial support agreement or money coming in, we click on the box and it takes you to a sample that's on the website. The next attachment is your disclosure. So you do have to disclose all information about the logistics, so to speak, of the event to your participants. So again, here on your disclosure, it's a sample. Most people just use the sample. Put your activity title, your activity date. We've populated it already with the appropriate statement once you've gotten approval, because you're going to disclose to your participants in 2 ways. 1, in your marketing material that you've submitted to us, and then 2, on the date of the event, maybe as one of their handouts or a slide at the beginning of the whole presentation that shows all of this information, so that your attendees know exactly what's expected of them and what they can expect from you. So it's been approved. You copy and paste those check boxes that you did about what they have to do to get CE. I would just say copy and paste them here, take off the little check box, and it's all done. But they have to match on your application and on this sheet. Your conflict of interest statement, again, we've populated it with various potential statements. Just pick the one that's appropriate and erase all the rest. So this educational activity does not include any content that relates to the products and or services of commercial interests that would create a conflict of interest. There you have it, you're done. Commercial support, if you're not getting any commercial support, just say there's no commercial support being received for this event. If there's enduring components, mark the first date that it starts, insert a date 2 years after that. Joint provider, if it's applicable, include that as well. So that's your disclosure. 1 page, fill it out, put it on a slide at the beginning of the event, make note of it in your welcome and housekeeping at the beginning. Here's our disclosures. Nobody has anything to disclose, and this is what you need to do to get credit. Boom, you're done.